Hi, I'm Kat, and today I'm here to do the March wrap-up. So in March, I pretty much forgot about movies. TV shows, I watched a couple, but I didn't finish anything, so I won't talk about those yet. So I'm here mainly and solely to talk about all the books I read in March. So let's get into it. And the first one I finished was one of my most anticipated books of 2021, and that is This Close to Okay by Lisa Cross Smith. I enjoyed this book so much. I kind of knew what to expect going into this book because I had read the synopsis, but this was exactly what I wanted out of this book. This is very much slice of life. So you get to see a little bit of these people's lives and then you zoom out. It's literally that. You zoom in for a weekend and then you zoom out. This, like I said, takes place over a weekend. So if you are interested in reading this book, I would encourage you to read it in the least amount of time possible because it really helps with the whole pacing of the story. This deals with some very heavy topics. The very beginning, we see someone trying to commit suicide, and then there's another character who stops them from doing that, and the story evolves from that. Those two characters get to know each other better throughout the book, and immediately the thing that I loved the most is that it felt so human. This story feels very human. I really enjoy the writing style, so I'd be very interested to read more from this author in the future. And yeah, if you can deal talking about suicide and suicide attempt, I would highly encourage you to pick up this book because I really loved it. Next up, I read a couple of audiobooks because I've been going on walks lately after lunch, and I've been really enjoying listening to an audiobook as I take those walks. So the first one I finished was Violet Bent Backwards Over the Grass by Lana Del Rey. I knew about this book, but I wasn't like, oh my god, I need to read it. But because it was available on Scribd and I really enjoy her voice, I decided to listen to it, and it was just okay. It's nothing to write home about. The thing about Lana Del Rey for me is that she really encompasses this melancholy persona kind of situation, and even though I don't enjoy that all of the time, I enjoy it sometimes. And the next audiobook that I listened to was Felon Poems by Reginald Dwayne Betts. And this one, like the title would suggest, deals with incarceration, with the lives of people who have been imprisoned. And with this one, I enjoyed the content a little bit better, but the narrator didn't really work for me. It was narrated by the author, so this is definitely a me problem because the author knows how he intended the poems to be read, but for some reason it didn't really click with me. That being said, I enjoyed some poems immensely. Very hit or miss. It was just fine, but there were some poems there that I really loved. Next up, I read Real Life by Brandon Taylor, and once again, I enjoyed this book so much. This is a very hard read because it deals with a very melancholy person, our main character, and some very heavy topics. So check for trigger warnings. I'm not the best at identifying all the trigger warnings in a book. I can tell you that it deals with assault. I can tell you that it deals with a little bit of childhood trauma and neglect, and with some unhealthy relationships. So if any of that is a sensitive subject for you, maybe this isn't the book that you should be reading, but I really enjoyed that. I really felt a connection with our main character. The voice was so clear. It's one of those books that really takes its time with the descriptions. This surprised me because I was not expecting this to be so academic. We have this university student, and he and his group of friends are, I don't know if you consider them scientists, but they do experiments, stuff like that, and that's part of the conversation in this book. Obviously, me being me, the thing that I always appreciate the most are the characters, and these characters jumped off the page. They felt, once again, very human, and I really enjoyed the discussions, especially when it comes to relationships, because we see this relationship kind of form and immediately it's off kilter, and as the book progresses you see these people trying to find something in the other person, and it doesn't really work that way, and they are just kind of bringing each other down and destroying each other. And while it's very unhealthy, it's very interesting for me to explore in literature. So I really enjoyed this book, really enjoyed the writing style. I highly recommend this one too. Then I finally read A Man Called Ove, I think that's how you say the name, by Fredrik Backman. I have been carrying this book with me for so long, and I know everybody raves about it, and I think that was part of the reason why it took me so long to pick this up in the first place, because I was a little bit scared that I wouldn't enjoy it as much as everybody said, but I really enjoyed this one. So this tells a story of Ove, and he is an old man who is trying to kill himself. This is a very self-contained story. We have this little community in this neighborhood, and for some reason or other, all of these characters kind of come to Ove, and he's one of those old men that is always grumpy. He's always in a bad mood, but at the same time, the way that his character develops is very sweet. So I can see why everybody loved this book so much, especially seeing where he's coming from and seeing his younger years. I don't think this author particularly is for me. I would be interested in giving him another chance maybe, but the premise would have to be like really up my street because of the translation. I am a bit iffy about that. I can understand the hype now. I get it. Then I read Strange Planet, and that is, I don't know if you would call it a graphic novel or a compilation of little comics, maybe that. I gave this to my brother as a birthday present, and we ended up reading it together, and it was very, very cute. Nothing too serious, but it was funny. Then I read another fantasy, Star Daughter by Sveta Thakrad, and I kind of had some problems with this book, so let's get into it. This deals with our main character, and she is half human, half star, which means that her father is a human and her mother is a full-fledged star. The whole mythology of this book really captured me. I enjoyed it so much. I think from the reviews I've read that this is Hindu inspired. The writing, I enjoyed it very, very much as well. The thing for me with this book is that this is not a very short fantasy. It isn't very long either. And what ended up happening for me is that kind of the halfway point, it felt like we were going around in circles. It felt very repetitive. So for me, for this book to really work, I think it either should have been shorter and more direct to what it was trying to do, or it should have been like this epic, very political, very complex fantasy and bigger. And like I said before, the world was so compelling that it felt like a shame that we were kind of wasting it by being so repetitive. I enjoyed it, but not enough. So I don't know what happened, because I was under the impression that this was the first in a series. But I checked Goodreads recently, and apparently this is a standalone. So something happened, because this definitely doesn't end well to be a standalone. It ends, but we have so many things left unanswered and unsolved that I don't know. Then we have a little bit of nonfiction, and that is Heavy, an American memoir by Kiese Lehman. Oh, this book, like, what an apt title. This book was a punch in the gut. I had this obviously as a physical copy, but I also listened to the audiobook, which is narrated by the author, and I really enjoyed his voice. So if you have the chance to listen to the audiobook, I highly recommend that, because it really worked for me. That being said, this story was very difficult to read. The way that he writes is so from the heart that you are almost right there along with him, experiencing everything as he did. The thing I enjoyed the most about this book, and what really gave it that extra heart for me, was the fact that he wrote this as if he was speaking to his mother. It was stunning. Brutal, but absolutely stunning. Then I read another nonfiction, and that is The End of Policing by Alex S. Vitale. And this book was very, very interesting. As the title would suggest, this kind of takes a look at police and everything that is entrusted to police officers. I've wanted to educate myself more on the subject. And this book in particular deals more with the American experience. So I think this is a very good introduction to the subject. It deals with a ton of topics: how police are meant to deal with mental health, how police deal with obviously bias and racism. It talked about schools and how police more and more are invited into the school environment. I would highly recommend this book, not as a end-all be-all and you have all the answers here, but as an introduction to the subject and to kind of get you introduced to certain situations so that you can look further into them, as I will be doing in the future. 2 more books to go. We have Frankly in Love by David Yoon, and this book was a bit of a mess for me, unfortunately. So the premise of this book is that we have Frank. Frank is Korean American and he is in love with a white American girl. Now his family don't support this type of situation at all. They want him to find a nice Korean American girl, and so he decides to get together with one of his friends who is also Korean American, because he knows that that way they can kind of trick their parents into letting them go out at night and stuff like that, so each one of them can just be with whoever they want to be. So I was intrigued, like, what is it about this story that it needs to be 400 pages long? And the thing is, it doesn't. It ends up being 400 pages long because halfway through the book, the premise and the themes of this book change completely. So I would say half this book deals with like high school romance drama, and the other half deals with family, with a sick parent, and expectations, like familial expectations. And that was my problem, because I felt like that discussion and that exploration was so much more interesting. In a way, it felt a little bit like we were disguising this book as one thing so that we could then talk about other things. And it was a shame, because it definitely could have stood on its own if it was just about Frank's relationship with his family, with his father in particular, and him just figuring out what being Korean American meant to him. I will definitely be reading more from David Yoon in the future, because this felt like a very personal story, especially after reading the acknowledgements. So this was probably the story that he needed to tell, and I can see him perfecting his craft in future books. We end the month with this book, and that is All Adults Here by Emma Straub. I've been lugging this book around with me for, I'd say, a whole year at this point, and I was really excited about reading it because I had heard so many great reviews. I knew that it dealt with family drama, family relationships, so that is something that I really enjoy seeing explored in literature. So it had everything for me to love it, in theory. But unfortunately, when it came down to it, this was not the book for me. What this book was trying to accomplish did not need to be dragged for 350 pages. It could have been done much more successfully in 250 tops, because it's very simple. So this deals with a family. We have a grandma who is kind of changing up her life. She has always been this type of person, or one type of person, very rigid, very strict, and that's the image that her kids have of her. But her kids are like fully grown up, fully adults, and she feels like it's time to introduce them to a new side of her, because even though she's old, she's still changing. And so she feels like it's time to tell them a secret that she's been holding on to. And that's pretty much it. The whole thing with this book is dealing with people changing even though they're old, and they're not like frozen in time ever. Everybody keeps on changing until the day they die. And I enjoyed the writing style, but there was too much writing in this book. we kept repeating the same ideas and the same messages over and over and over again. The characters did not particularly stand out. The plot was practically non-existent because, once again, this is very much a slice of life story. It was a shame because I was so excited to read this book and I had seen so many rave reviews about it, and then it ended up not being for me. And that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please let me know in the comments down below what were your favorites of the month. I always love to know. And if you've read any of the books that I mentioned, let me know your thoughts down below as well. And that's it. I'll see you next time. Bye!